drive time. In a region that's frozen, still, and dark for much of the year, the Northland awakens with a burst of energy during these long days when the tundra turns green, wildflowers explode in a variety of colors, animals gather in great flocks and herds, and 3,000 or so beluga whales gather at the mouth of the Churchill River. Welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us tonight. As Joan mentioned, in July 2019, we took a 2,200-mile drive from St. Petersburg to Winnipeg in our BirdMobile. And of course, we made numerous birding stops along the way, as you can see on the map, at a variety of national wildlife refuges, state parks, etc. From Winnipeg, we then flew to Churchill. Tonight, we want to talk a little bit about the Churchill region, about the geography and the history of its development, but especially want to spend time talking about the wonderful wildlife, the beluga whales, which were there, at least 2,500 to 3,000 animals. We did get to see a few polar bears, which was very exciting, and the wonderful bird life. Hudson Bay is bordered by 4 Canadian provinces, and the town of Churchill, as you can see, sits on the far western side of the bay. Trade has always been a key to the development of this region, and I'm talking going back thousands of years. The reason for this is one can proceed directly by water as far south as Winnipeg and as far west as northern Alberta. The bay itself is at least 2 times the size of Texas, and the Churchill community is famous worldwide as a spot for wildlife observation. Within 10 miles of the city, one can move into 3 distinct ecosystems: the marine, where these beautiful beluga whales were, to the boreal forest, home of moose and red fox, to the open tundra, where one can find caribou, Arctic fox, and the occasional sandhill crane, as you see in the center of this image. As we mentioned, development in Churchill was totally tied into trade. There is documented evidence of a number of First Nations tribes that established seasonal hunting camps in the area as much as 4,000 years ago. And in addition to hunting, they also traded among themselves. The first European presence was in the early 18th century, and these European adventurers were attracted by the fur trade. In the late 1800s, the Canadian government was looking for a seaport that would be open a reasonable part of the year. They needed a spot from which to export the grains that are grown in their southern plains provinces. And Churchill was selected. Yes, it does freeze over in the winter, but it's open a very reasonable part of the year for the shipping necessary to export these grains. With that decision being made, a railroad was constructed from Winnipeg to Churchill in order to deliver the grains. And this is almost 1,800 miles, and the trip takes almost 2 days. With completion of the railroad, the town really started to develop more and more. A hospital was constructed. They now have what's called a town center complex, which houses the hospital, the school, a library, a recreation center, and, being Canadians, an indoor ice rink. Just outside of town, maybe 5+ miles, for a number of years in the 20th century, the Canadian Space Agency had a site from which they fired rockets to study the Aurora. This site is now the Northern Studies Center. There was a significant derailment in fall of 2018, which really was devastating for the community because essentially all of their foodstuffs and supplies are shipped by rail. It's just too expensive to do that by air transport. The rail line was just being completed and ready to reopen when we were there in July 2019. The Northern Study Center we mentioned houses dormitories and a number of labs, and it is one of the premier sites for Arctic research. And they still have a few of the rocket silos on the general campus, but they're not shooting any rockets anymore. But ultimately, Churchill is about ecotourism. There's something, as you can see here, there's something going on there basically 12 months out of the year, and just fabulous stuff. So much so that certainly until last year, it attracted up to 500,000 eco-tourists a year, generating around $115 million.
Churchill River in the upper left, and Hudson Bay in the upper right, and the quaint town of Churchill in the middle. There are no traffic lights in Churchill because there's really not much traffic. There are only about 900 to 1,000 people that live in the town. And most of the year, the polar bears outnumber the people. Walking out of our hotel into the middle of the street, I took a picture to the south, then turned and took a picture to the north with the grain elevator in the background. Lindsay's Arctic parka was the attire when we were here 15 years ago in February to see the Northern Lights, and when we actually took a sled dog ride down this main street. When we left Tampa, it was about 86 to 88 degrees. When we landed in Churchill, the wind chill was -55, and the actual temperature never got above -25 degrees the entire week we were there. But the auroras were magical. We love helping our family enjoy birds, nature, and the outdoors. This is our beautiful great niece, Natalie, when she was 2 years old or so and learning her birds from her dad. Sister Nancy's son, Ryan, who's one of our 4 awesome nephews. Here she is getting ready to learn those birds.
And what's this one?
A twinkle.
A waxwing.
A waxwing.
Okay, and what's this one?
A flame.
A cardinal.
A cardinal.
Yeah, what's this one?
Cardinal.
A goldfinch.
A goldfinch.
Yeah, and what's this one?
Goldfinch.
An oriole.
An eagle.
Yeah, and what's this one?
An eagle.
A hawk.
A hawk.
Oh, she's such a sweetheart. Looking at the range of this beautiful warbler, male on the left, female on the right, it covers almost 150,000 square miles. The nests are frequently parasitized by the brown-headed cowbirds. We actually saw several brown-headed cowbird youngsters in our yard just the other day. Unlike many birds into which the nests, the eggs are put into the nests, the cowbirds, the warblers oftentimes can recognize the cowbird eggs and just kick them out. But oftentimes the cowbirds will come back and build a nest on top, and it goes back and forth up to 6 tiers. But we saw and or heard this bird, this beautiful call, the beautiful song almost every day of our trip to and from Winnipeg. Interestingly, in addition to the US form that we normally see on the left, there's also a golden form, which is found in the Keys and the West Indies, and a mangrove form found in Mexico, Central America, and Northern South America. The range of the savanna sparrow is just like that of the warbler, and it's one of the most numerous songbirds in all of North America. And we saw this bird many, many days of our trip, almost as many days as we saw the warbler. The handsome white-crowned sparrows, the birds we see in Southeast Alaska every summer, migrate almost 3,000 miles to winter in Southern California. Ah, the ubiquitous house sparrow. Like many animals, these birds are philopatric, which means they return to their birthplace after migration. There are about 15 distinct subspecies in the West, which are actually determined by the color of their habitat, what the flowers, the berries, the trees, the bushes, what colors they have. The sparrows will adopt part of those colors. Male on the right, female on the left. The yellow-bellied sapsuckers are the only eastern North American woodpecker that's, quote, completely migratory. What that means is, if you look at the range map, there are no purples. Purple means that the birds are year-round in a specific area, but there are no resident birds, the sapsuckers. They all migrate. And it's been known that they drill sap wells in upward of 1,000 different tree species. And you birders in the area and on the audience know that a group of crows is called a murder, and a group of owls is called a parliament. But you might not know that a group of sapsuckers is called a slurp. Your fun fact for the evening. We saw many tree swallows in the Churchill area. We actually hooked up with one of the researchers who was checking the nest boxes, looking at the eggs, banding the youngsters when they reach 10 days of age. These birds winter farther north and return to their nesting grounds sooner than any of the other American swallows. Handsome American golden plover with that chick in the bottom left. They're very long distance migrants. They migrate 20,000 miles a year from the high Arctic all the way to southern South America. And this includes 3,500-mile nonstop flight over the Atlantic Ocean. Amazing, amazing migrants. The structure and the shape of the Whimbrel's bill gave it its genus name of Numenius, which means new moon. And since structure determines function, it's no wonder that the shape of the Whimbrel's bill closely matches the shape of burrows dug by fiddler crabs, which are a primary winter food source of the Whimbrels. They're also long-distance migrants, migrating some 2,500 miles from southern Canada or New England all the way to South America. If you have a slice of bread in your hand, you have the size and weight of the smallest sandpiper in the world. Researchers found many years ago that the least sandpipers had a relatively new feeding mechanism where they would probe in the wet mud with their bill and use surface tension of the water to transport the prey rather quickly all the way from their bill tip into their mouth. Only the female Wilson snipes tend the eggs and the nestlings, but both parents split up the duties once the nestlings fledge. The male takes the two oldest, the female takes the two youngest, and after leaving the nest, the mates have no further contact for the rest of the year. The males advertise on what are called singing grounds before they head into the air for their courtship displays or sky dances where they're trying to impress the females. They do rolling, twisting flight that may go up to several hundred feet and then start diving. And this is accompanied by a twittering, non-vocal sound called winnowing, which is created in flight by vibrating the outer tail feathers that are spread wide in the dives. It's amazing that this sound is produced by vibrating tail feathers in the wind during the dives. Unlike the long-billed dowitchers, the short-bills do what's called molt migration. They first head to an intermediate area where they spend as much time as they need to complete their molt before heading on to their ultimate wintering grounds. And both sexes incubate the eggs, but only the males care for the young. The smallest and least known of the world's 4 godwit species, the Hudsonian godwits, after breeding in the subarctic, migrate all the way to southern South America in several nonstop flights, each of several thousand miles. And here we are in the mouth of the Churchill River. getting ready to be up close and personal with the beautiful beluga whales.
The belugas, along with narwhals, are the two members of the family of toothed whales known as Monodontidae. This name itself signifies one tooth and is a misnomer. The narwhals have two teeth, and in the males, the left one grows into that beautiful, just amazing tusk, and the belugas have 38 teeth. Just for a size comparison, we put down adult male lengths and weights of an adult beluga as well as a male bottlenose dolphin. And you can see the belugas are almost 3 times the weight of a bottlenose and significantly longer, although the subpopulation in Western Hudson Bay is actually maxed out around 14 or 15 feet in length. There is also, in fact, a DNA documented hybrid between a narwhal and a beluga. In around 1990, a Danish whale researcher was in Greenland and came upon an Inuit hunter's hut, and that center skull had been nailed to the outside of his cabin. He's talked to the fellow about it and was advised that he'd found 3 of these very strange animals. Of course, he'd killed all of them. And the researcher, with the Inuit's permission, took one of the teeth, and that was from which they were able to do the DNA studies. And also, very interestingly, the mating was between a female narwhal and a male beluga. This is quite interesting because one of the important secondary sexual characteristics that a female narwhal considers in selecting a mate is the length and size of the tusk. And obviously, a beluga does not have a tusk. As toothed whales, they only have one blowhole, and that, as you would think with an animal that spends a significant part of the year swimming in and among ice floes and under the ice shelf, they don't have a tall dorsal fin, which would clearly interfere with swimming under ice. Instead, they have that thickened dorsal ridge. And also, as one would expect, they have lots of blubber. Typical whales have fused neck or cervical vertebrae, which allows them to swim fast. However, the cervical vertebrae in the belugas are not fused. This leads to increased maneuverability, which is felt to be a significant aid in their hunting. And in these little video clips, you can certainly see the animals turning their heads left, right, up and down, some of it just checking us out, I think. They're slow swimmers, usually average about 4 miles an hour. They very frequently hunt in the shallows of the Churchill estuary, and it is not uncommon for one of them to be stranded at low tide. Amazingly, this doesn't seem to cause them any problem whatsoever. They just wait for the next tide to come in and swim away. They're very social animals. Pod size can vary from 10 to 25, and these are typically very loose groupings as compared with orcas, for instance, would have a very strict matriarchal society and organization to their pods. And they will hunt and migrate as a group. And it's just phenomenal to be out in the kayak with these guys swimming all around. The Churchill River estuary is an excellent summer home for these mammals. It is the site of a large fish nursery, so there's plenty of food for them to eat. The waters are shallow, which prevents one of their main natural predators, the orca, from pursuing them up into the river. And the water is upwards of 5+ degrees warmer than that out in Hudson Bay, which is great for the newborns and also for the adults that are molting. As the bay freezes, the animals head north and spend the winter along the edge of seasonal ice pack or within polynyas. They eat a hefty amount each day, up to 50 pounds of various types of seafood. And interestingly, even though they're toothed whales, they use those puckered lips to suction prey into their mouth. They will occasionally grasp, for instance, a larger fish with the teeth, but more typically they suck the prey into the
Hey, Tom, Lindsay, we've lost sound, I believe, right at the beginning of that last slide. Are you muted? Okay, Tom, Lindsay, are you there? I think we may have lost them.
They're there. They
Right.
have to.
Okay.
They're there. They're
We heard you, you just couldn't hear us.
We have to
Okay.
get rid of the, never mind. Are we good now?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so typically they suck a prey item into the mouth, close the mouth, push the tongue forward, that pushes the water out from between their teeth, and then they swallow the prey. And this is basically just how a large baleen whale would feed, sucking prey into the mouth, closing the mouth, but they push the prey items out through their baleen. They're quite vocal animals, often called sea canaries, and make any number of sounds, very, very important in their day-to-day activities. They don't have vocal cords, but instead generate sound through air sacs in the blowhole. Just really amazing, and these are very readily heard without aid of a hydrophone when you're on the water. Many of the calls are felt to be behavior specific, and we're talking about upwards, some scientists estimate 1,200 different calls. For instance, quiet ones if they're hunting, loud ones if they're trying to locate members of their group, and just a whole variety of so-called social sounds. They also, within these air sacs, generate echolocation clicks. This is how they navigate, and it is how they hunt. These clicks are generated in the nasal sacs, directed out through the fatty melon on their forehead, exit, strike, say this fish is shown in the diagram, and then return to the whale. The whale's external ears are sealed. The sound waves or clicks instead are absorbed and go into the lower jaw, which is fat-filled and conduct sound well. They then pass to the middle ear, inner ear, and then on to the brain for interpretation. They are sexually mature between 5 and 8 years of age, and the females typically have a calf only every 2 to 3 years. The calves were born in the late spring and summer, and we saw quite a few newborns, probably no more than a week old. And as you'll see in this short clip, always swimming right by mom. They remain gray until they're 1 to 2 years of age, and then very gradually assume their white adult coloration by age 7. And until fairly recently, it was felt that only female human beings went through menopausal change. We now, however, know that belugas, narwhals, orcas, and short-finned pilot whale females also go through menopause. Just amazing. And these belugas will go through this change. It's felt around age 25, and they're going to live to 40 or even sometimes 80 years. They have 2 major natural predators. This orca really menaces them when they're in open waters, and with loss of sea ice, the orcas are going to have lots more room in which to hunt. The other major natural predator is the polar bear. They will certainly wait by a breathing hole, and if an unsuspecting beluga surfaces, will grab it either in their mouth or use that massive front paw to grab the animal and sling it up on the ice. Climate change is clearly going to affect and is affecting these animals. With the sea ice disappearing, there's more shipping in the Arctic waters, there's more oil and gas exploration. All of these activities lead to increased noise, which makes it difficult for them to hunt and to navigate adequately, and always is going to raise the potential for water pollution. The Western Hudson Bay subpopulation is quite healthy, with some estimates of 57,000 animals, and they're felt to be up to 200,000 worldwide. Overall, the species is considered near threatened. The eastern side of Hudson Bay, that subpopulation is endangered, and the Cook Inlet, Alaska subpopulation is critically endangered. But it was just such a treat to be kayaking and out in zodiacs, just watching these guys swim around being whales. Just really a treat.
We did see some Arctic hares. This one is in his transitional wardrobe between the all brown summer coat and the all white winter coat. And hey, Gene, Brian, how cool would it be if Lindsay and I pulled up in front of the Florida Master Naturalist District Conference in this awesome machine? Unfortunately, Lindsay said no. So sad, so sad. Pacific loons, one of our favorite loon species, and like all loon species, actually, they're very awkward on land and actually can't take off from land. But when they get in the air, they're very fast flyers, 35 to 40 miles an hour. And as long as the pair is producing offspring, they remain monogamous. They're very territorial on the breeding grounds. And there's some researchers in Alaska. It's kind of funny when we were up visiting Lori and Rich that these birds will do threat displays to airplanes flying overhead on their way into land at the international airport in Anchorage. Very territorial. The Hudson Bay subspecies of common Eiders were the species we saw. They're the largest duck in the Northern Hemisphere. There is a Pacific form that's distinct, both genetically and morphologically, that will probably become its own separate species in the not too distant future. Female on the left, male on the right in the fog. Young Arctic terns migrate south with mom and dad and remain in the Southern Hemisphere until they're a couple years old before returning to their birthplace. North American birds have a very long 25,000 mile per year migration, hardly ever land, spending most of their lives in the air, living by their love of long daylight. And what we found most interesting was that the nesters that we saw in Iceland and Greenland have a 44,000 mile per year migration route. The greater scalp, the females line their nest with the layer of down, which they pluck from their own breast. Once the incubation begins, the males take off and leave the females to molt on large, isolated lakes that have abundant food and cover. One of the most handsome of the ducks, the wood ducks, are the only North American duck that regularly produces 2 broods per year. They tend to pair early in January, actually, so most birds arrive on their breeding grounds already paired. The diet of the American Wigeon has a greater proportion of plants than that of any other dabbling duck. They have a very short, goose-like bill that exerts more force at the tip than the bill of any other dabbler. This allows them to dislodge and pluck vegetation very, very efficiently. The common golden eyes are the only North American duck to derive benefits from lake acidification. Most fish can't live in acidic conditions. This decreases the competition between the fish and the ducks for these acid-tolerant insects, which form a primary prey item for the ducks during certain times of the year. And the female common golden eyes will often lay their eggs in the nest of other females or even in the nest of other duck species. And the mallard, the ancestor of all domestic duck breeds except the Muscovy. And yes, they do quack like a duck, the females anyway. The males don't quack, only the females do. The males have a very quiet, raspy sound. The northern shovelers have a huge bill with over 100 fine projections along the edges that act like a colander, filtering out their prey items. Unlike most birds that need regular sleep, pectoral sandpipers during the breeding season can go without sleep for weeks at a time when they're continually active under the constant light of the Arctic summer. They're very promiscuous. The males mate with multiple females and vice versa. Breeding males have an inflatable throat sac that expands and contracts rhythmically during their display flights when they're trying to impress the females. It's a very hollow hooting sound. The sandhill cranes. Their elegance has inspired people and cultures all over the world for centuries. Unique tone trumpeting call is a product of anatomy. They have very long tracheas that coil into the sternum that helps produce the richness of that beautiful sound. They frequently preen with vegetation and mud stained with iron oxide. This gives them that reddish brown color rather than their natural gray color that we typically see them wearing. And the fossils of most birds show that they're younger than 1.8 million years of age. However, the oldest sandhill crane fossil is about 2.5 million years old. And interestingly, it was found just over the Skyway in Sarasota County. We were more bear aware on this trip than on any other trip that we've ever been on. Whenever we were out and about, we had bear guards on duty for us. And it's interesting, if there's something in town where a bear might be in town and people are worried, you're allowed to go in anywhere. You can go in the library, you can go in the police station, you go in a restaurant, you can go in a fire station, you go in a hotel, or you can go in anybody's car. It's actually illegal, against the law, to lock your car in Churchill. And if you do, you can be cited and ticketed.
The last night of our trip, we were just finishing dinner and our guide got word that there was a female polar bear and 2 cubs, maybe 5 miles or so out of town. So we all went out, got in our traveling van and headed out and just spent about a half hour just watching these 3 interact. It was truly amazing and a true treat, because in the summer, you usually don't see many bears, if any at all. This western shore of Hudson Bay is the best place to see polar bears in the wild. During the winter, they're out on frozen Hudson Bay hunting the ringed seal, which is their favored prey. As the ice begins to break up, they tend to ride the flows southward in the bay. They then come ashore and begin gradually moving their way back north toward the Churchill area. This area is favored by them because the ice tends to form earlier in this area. By mid-October, there are some 600 to 1,000 bears massed along the 100-mile stretch of coast from Churchill south to the Nelson River, the largest concentration of polar bears in the world. Typically, only the pregnant females will den for any length of time. And in 1969, one of the largest denning areas was discovered, and it's only like 30 miles south of Churchill. It is now a Canadian national park. And with all the bears around, it's obviously a prime site for polar bear research, one of the older traps on the left and the more updated model on the right. So what happens with all these bears around if one decides to come to town? If the bear is moving through and not stopping and messing around, the wildlife officers will just monitor the progress and help escort him out of town. However, if he wants to go visiting, they have a set protocol that is followed. The first morning we were in town, Tom and I were out walking about some, just kind of getting familiar with where things were, and started hearing all sorts of ruckus, truck and car horns, gunfire, etc. And there was a polar bear in town, and we did not realize this at the time. The two photos on the right were taken from a phone video from our van driver named Lindsay Bell, interestingly enough. And she had actually seen this bear up on this apartment porch or deck. But if a bear gets distracted when he comes to town, the police and the wildlife officers begin getting as close as they can to him in their vehicles, blowing horns, firing cracker shells, which are blank shotgun shells, trying to get the bear moving. If he doesn't get the hint, a helicopter goes up and the bear is they try and use the helicopter ruckus and size to move the bear along. If it still doesn't take a hint, the bear is darted and he goes to jail. If the bay is frozen, they will only hold the bear here for a couple of days and then they release them out on the bay. If the bay is not frozen, however, they're held for 30 days and then they're airlifted some 50 kilometers outside of town. And while they're in jail, they only give the animals water. Initially, they used to feed them some, and the bears got smart. Hey, I can spend a month here and have food and water delivered to me. So now they only give them water, and as we mentioned earlier, they don't typically eat much in the summer anyway, so this is not a hardship on the animal. And this is certainly not an inexpensive proposition. We're talking about some 200 bears a year that end up in the jail and $8,000 per bear.
In certain areas when we were out and about, we needed to cover up for protection against what are called bulldogs, whose bites are like those of horseflies on steroids. That's Lindsay on the left and our super great friend Lori Rothstein on the right. With her husband Rich, they're the best wildlife photographers we know, and you're seeing several of their beautiful photos and videos in our presentation. Since we're never quite sure which one took the picture, we just simply credit Team Rothstein. They're watching in Anchorage where they live. Thanks, guys. Love you both. Always fun to watch trumpeter swans, especially when they're landing and taking off. The largest waterfowl species native to North America with a 7 to 8 foot wingspan. And at 25 pounds, they're the North America's heaviest flying bird. They require a football field length runway to get up in the air. Always fun to watch them with their youngsters, the cygnets, the swans, just being swans, doing their thing. Always fun to watch. If the breeding ranges of these two gull species overlapped, you can see where it might be very difficult to tell them apart unless you could see the red legs of the Bonaparte's gull or the black legs of the laughing gull. Thankfully, you see the orange, which is the breeding ranges, and the two range maps don't overlap at all, or it would be a very difficult ID to tell them apart. The Bonaparte's gulls are the smallest gull over most of North America. They're the only gull that nests in trees. And during the summer, their diet switches from fish to insects. And you think they were named for Napoleon Bonaparte, but actually they were named for his cousin, Charles Bonaparte, who made many ornithology contributions to the Academy of Natural Sciences in Philadelphia. We've often seen around here anyway, and in Florida and in the South, the laughing gulls sitting on the head of a pelican trying to harass him to get him to cough up his food. In the higher latitudes, the role of the laughing gull is taken over by the Bonaparte's gulls, and the object of the harassment changes from pelicans to sea ducks. To counter this, the Scoters, or sea ducks, adapted what's called synchronous surfacing, which is basically safety in numbers. So what happens? A flock of 50, 100, 200, usually surf Scoters, dive at about the same time. But more importantly, they surface at about the same time. So when 200 heads pop to the surface simultaneously, this tends to confuse the gulls, making it more likely that the Scoters get to keep the prey items that they collected underwater. 7 males after this female in the lead. The surf Scoters breed on freshwater lakes in the high Arctic, and they're actually the only breeding species of Scoter confined to America. And what was most interesting to me is the females are not territorial, but the males will defend an area around the female and her brood as they swim along. It's not a specific spot on land. The mothers provide no parental care other than guarding the chicks, so the young will often switch from one brood to another, which is also unusual in ducks. The herring gull, their breeding range is extending southward along the Atlantic coast, where they're displacing laughing gulls from some areas. But at the northern end of their range, they are being displaced by great blackback gulls. Their plumages vary considerably all across the northern hemisphere, and this combined with the tendency to hybridize with other gull species makes it a big headache regarding their taxonomy and ID purposes of the hybrids. This guy is just shaking his booty and getting those feathers, keeping them nice and trim and getting ready to keep them in shape for all their important duties. Sibling rivalry can be very deadly. The herring gulls typically have 3 chicks. The first 2 hatch on the same day, but the third one hatches a couple days later. So he gets less food, weighs less, and grows slower. But he's the insurance policy in case anything happens to one or both of the first 2. I have lots of favorites, and ravens are definitely one of the, say 25 or so birds on my, quote, top 10 list of favorite birds. They're the most widespread corvid, and they're actually in most of the intelligence tests that are being done in the avian populations, they are number 1 as far as the smartest birds, coming in ahead of a couple of parrot species. And just for the heck of it, if anybody wants to take a guess at what the number 4 smartest bird was, just send it into your chat. It amazed us. I would never have gotten that one right. Along with redpolls, snowy owls, and gyrfalcons, the raven is one of only 11 birds tough enough to overwinter in the Arctic. Beautiful flyers. So much fun to watch them. They roll and twist and turn and do somersaults and turn upside down. And we actually saw one in Southeast Alaska fly completely upside down for almost a quarter mile. Very feisty, quite fun-loving, if you will. That one on the upper left is harassing a hawk. The 2 in the upper right are interacting. The one in the lower left is trying to figure out what's in that PVC pipe. And the one on the bottom right is learning how to ride a bicycle. The females have a very characteristic knocking call. When you hear this, it's a female raven until proven otherwise. They do have other calls, bonks and croaks and other things, but that call is a female raven. The croak is the most common call of the ravens, And certainly when you hear this, there's nothing else to think about. This is a raven. Though they also make other sounds too that are quite interesting, but this is a raven. Parasitic Jaegers, very, very, very acrobatic flyers. And along with frigate birds, they're kleptoparasites, which means they get most of their food by stealing it from other birds. This Jaeger had harassed a Bonaparte's gull, got him to drop his fish, and he snatched it out of midair before it hit the water. Really fun to watch them fly. The handsome bald eagle, the symbol of the US for almost 250 years. And interestingly, the largest nest on record was found in St. Pete. I actually saw this in my youth, around 10 years of age, in one of the little museums here, and it was unbelievably big. You could put a Volkswagen Beetle in it. Look at those dimensions, 10 feet in diameter, 20 feet tall, and it weighed 3 tons. Huge nest. Though fish are the mainstay of the eagle's diet, they're also notorious scavengers and will readily take waterfowl during certain times of the year, especially in migration, like these large masses of coots and ducks. The one in the upper right had just snatched a handsome pintail duck in Sacramento National Wildlife Refuge in California. So we've talked about a very special place, Churchill, an amazing area that wears a different hat for each season of the year. The amazing belugas who gather in the Churchill River by the thousands each summer to have their babies and molt their skin. The iconic polar bears who congregate here in the largest concentration in the world. The gorgeous auroras, where for 300 days of the year, there's a possibility to see their colorful dances across the sky. And the beautiful bird life, where over 200 species have been documented. So we thank you for Zooming with us, and we hope you've enjoyed the evening. If you have any questions, we'll try to answer them. I gotta go back.
Okay, first of all, Tom, we want the answer to your trivia question. You asked with the raven, what the, I think it was 4th smartest, was it that you were asking, or?
Yes.
Okay, so we had some guesses. We
Yes.
had crow was one, jay was another, and cormorant was one of the guesses.
It was actually a pileated woodpecker.
Oh my goodness.
I didn't get that one, but anyway, I thought that was pretty cool.
And that is the 4th smartest bird.
Yeah, and in some of the tests, I mean, obviously, yeah, there are many different kinds, but no, they're.
How cool, how cool. Well, of course, rave reviews are coming in about your talk and everything. So if anyone has questions, please put them in there now. One question that I had, and it's a toughie, but I was thinking about what you had said with the beluga whales, and that they have fat deposits in their jawbone, and I believe the bottlenose dolphin does too, and that assists with their hearing. What happens if they are losing weight, for example, climate change, less food possibly, and down the way, and if they start losing weight and start using their deposits and their fat deposits, do they reabsorb any of that fat in their jaw? And if so, do you know, would that maybe reduce their hearing abilities?
I can't answer that. I haven't read. Certainly loss of their layers of blubber would be a huge issue for them in the wintertime. I'm not certain about potential loss from the jaw. Do you?
I would think that it would affect both their communication and their hunting ability without as much fat in the lower jaw, because they wouldn't be able to get the signals back from the fish or from a channel marker or a boat or whatever.
But I have never seen that in writing, that
Right.
is a potential issue.
And hopefully we won't find out, right?
Amen.
Right.
Fantastic. Always, everyone is really enjoying it. We have a question from Teresa. She's wondering, what are the 2nd and the 3rd smartest birds? So you said the raven's the number 1.
Yeah, they're parrots. The different parrots. One's an African parrot, and one's a South African parrot. I don't remember the names. It wasn't really important. It's just in the parrot species.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic.
They used
There we
to be
go.
#1 all the time, but the raven in most of the tests that I read about took over the #1 slot.